And we will also take questions live at the very end. So don't worry if you have questions at the end, we will get to those then. And you will absolutely get a recording of today's workshop after the session. So that will come to you around tomorrow. Right, today we are here. We are talking about how to tell your story in hiring conversations. So specifically, I'm going to go through what that means, but with some introductions first on who's on this call. So my name is Lauren Pizer. I am a co-founder and VP of Learning Experience at Pathstream, and I am joined by two wonderful colleagues, Amy Ahern and Amanda Santamero, also both from Pathstream. Amy's the VP of Learning or of Career Services, and Amanda is a former recruiter and currently works on our enrollments team. So Amanda's going to be sharing some of her perspective from being a former recruiter with us as we go through this content today. So let's get started. The goal today is really to equip you with a framework to effectively and confidently answer this very common interview question, which is, tell me about yourself. Right? This is something that we see all of the time in hiring conversations, in networking conversations, but it doesn't always look like, tell me about yourself. It can look a lot of different ways. So for example, it could look like, hey, tell me your story. Sometimes people can ask this question where they say, can you walk me through your resume? They might say, how did you go from where you started to where you are in your career today? And finally, sometimes this question can actually be asked as, hey, why are you interested in this company? So what I'm going to be teaching you today is a way to answer all of these kinds of questions, because there's actually a very common way of answering them. So we're going to go through that and explore that today. First, I want to kind of share with you what this question is really about and why it's so frequently asked and why telling your story is something that you're always going to have to do. The first reason is because this question provides an overview of yourself and your resume. It's like a 1 to 2 minute snapshot of your resume, and it gives hiring managers places where they can dig in further, right? So it gives that broad overview of your career. It also forces you to sell yourself. And that's why recruiters like to use this question, because you only have 1 or 2 minutes to answer this, and you really have to put your career in the best light possible because you don't have a lot of time and you really want to sell yourself. It also offers a glimpse into your personality, right? And that's something that doesn't always get to come through on your resume. So you get to show your motivation, your enthusiasm, your preparation for this job interview. So it's really a signal of a lot of different things to employers. And this is a quote directly from Amanda, who's on the call today, that the people I'm most excited to place in jobs are people that are most excited to talk to me. So this illustrates that telling your story is an opportunity to share your excitement and to really stand out to an employer. So that's why this is so important. But I want to kind of allay some of your fears, because a lot of times there's a lot of pressure put on your story, right? And so there's some good news about this question. First of all, it is an opportunity for you to craft your story the way that you want it said, right? You get to create that first impression. It's really on you, and it's up to you, right? You get the power over telling your story the way you want it told. Your personality gets to come through, right? As I said, on resumes, that doesn't happen. So you get to showcase some of your soft skills, some of your personality in the way you answer this. People really like stories, actually. So you get to build connection with people by telling them your story. And people love to listen to stories 10 times over than just listening to information. So remember that you get to build a connection with this question. And the last piece of good news is that there is a formula for this. There is a specific way that you can answer this question in interviews, and we're going to go through that today. And once you've got that down, I promise you this will feel very natural and very easy for you. So I have a quick poll that I want to give. I have two questions, and just to kind of gauge the room a little bit. The first question is, how comfortable are you with the question, tell me about yourself? So 1 is not comfortable at all. 5 is extremely comfortable. And I want to know, where are we at? Where are we at in the room? Great. Thank you for voting. Perfect. Okay, so I'm going to show you these results. So it looks like most people are at about a 3 out of 5, right? Some people feel extremely comfortable, and I hope I can show you some things that you can learn today. And some of us are not comfortable at all, which is totally understandable. Now I've got my second question here, which is, let's see, let me get to that. Poll 2. Okay. What is the hardest part about answering this question for you? So I want to know what feels the most difficult about answering the question, tell me about yourself. So let's see some votes here. Oops. Couple more seconds. Okay. So we have a range here. We have some people, it's difficult to talk about and frame your past experiences, but the majority here is how to know what past experiences to include and not to include. And that is a big part of today, because this is where a lot of people really struggle with this question. So let's keep going here. Let's see. All right. So what we're going to do today is we're going to review some good versus less good responses to this question. And then we're going to give you a framework for how to talk about how to tell your story. So I'm going to invite my friend Anthony to come on up here and read an example story from Jake. So Jake is in an interview, and he's being talked to by his hiring manager, who is asking him, hey, Jake, tell me about yourself. And here's what he says.
So I graduated from college a few years ago and wasn't totally sure what I wanted to do. I got a sales job at a technology company and started learning the industry. Eventually, my team was reduced and I was laid off. I took off time to help my parents, whose health was declining, and started working part-time retail jobs while I was looking for something else. A friend of mine recently changed careers and became a data analyst, and she recommended I explore the industry. I looked into it, was really interested, and ended up enrolling in a certificate. I just finished and I'm interested in data analysis work now. Your company looks great, and I'd love to be part of the team.
Thank you. So I want to know from you all in the chat, what is something that could be improved about this story? What is something that could be improved about this story? If you were giving Jake feedback, what's something you would say, I'd love you to make this better. Yes, Christine in the chat, he happened upon the field. Yeah, it feels random, right? It's not incredibly specific. That's another great thing to notice. Anything else you notice? No timelines. It's it's a little long-winded and includes negative stuff like layoffs and retail work. Yeah, it feels like he's kind of going along with no intention or no goals, right? It's like there's not a lot of drive there, right? All right, awesome. Thank you. Okay, so Anthony, 1 more minute of your time. I would love it if you could read this story. So this is Jake's second attempt at his story.
Absolutely. After I graduated from college, I started my career as a sales development representative at a technology company. I taught myself about all the products I was selling, learned Salesforce, and developed deep relationships with large clients. I was in the top 10% of representatives the year I started and created new systems for managing clients for my team. When my department was reduced due to company layoffs, I took some time off to take care of my parents who were in poor health. I'd always been interested in data analysis, so I taught myself some basic skills. But I quickly realized I wanted a more structured program, so I enrolled in the Tableau data analytics program at the university. I performed exploratory data analysis using spreadsheets, SQL, and Tableau, and practiced packing insights for various business stakeholders. I got hands-on practice with various data analysis tools during the program. I'm now searching for my next opportunity, and I'm very interested in your company. The work you are all doing to make healthcare more available is a mission very close to my heart. As the primary caretaker for my parents, I see how important this is every single day.
Thanks, Jake slash Anthony. So I'd like to see in the chat, what makes this a better story? What do we like about this story? Yep, so Cynthia says that there's some structure here. There's more detail. Yep, I agree. There's some initiative, right? Including success, which could sound a little bit arrogant if some people see it that way. But yes, that's a good point. We're going to talk about that. It's worded a little bit more professionally. And yes, so Karen ties his personal story to why he wants to work at this company. Absolutely. Demonstrates growth. Awesome. This is so great. Thank you. So I would say that there's a lot of really good things going on here, and let's kind of go through each one really quick so you have these in your head, in your mind. So first of all, this is a very, he is very specific about what skills he has. So he's specific in terms of the past skills that he's learned, the past roles that he's held. He's more intentional about explaining that. He also demonstrates his accomplishments that can sound to some people a little bit braggy, right? But I want to say something here, that this is not a negative way of bragging. You're just telling people what you did, and you're trying to put it in the best light possible. So a little bit of, like, if you feel a little bit uncomfortable saying something about your accomplishments and your story, then you're probably on the right path. Okay. You want to put yourself out there, and you want to put yourself in the best light, because if you're not going to talk about your accomplishments, then who is? Right. So you want to insert some of that in here in a way that feels authentic to you. It also mentions that Jake took some time off, but it frames it appropriately, right? And it doesn't overemphasize it, right? It says, it makes it sound almost intentional, right? He got laid off, so he decided that he was going to use his time in a great way to support his parents. So it talks about it confidently and frames it appropriately. So Jake also clearly names the certificate program and gets specific about what was learned. A lot of times what I hear people do is they're downplaying their education, or they're downplaying what they've taught themselves, even if it's a self-taught program. So really special here that he is naming the certificate and specifically what he did in the certificate program. And then finally, he's finding a connection between his skills, his interest, and the company. So this is where it's really important to be intentional and to research the company that you're talking to. So do I know if Jake absolutely, like, if this is the most important mission to him in his life to work for a healthcare company? I don't know. And maybe not. Maybe he has lots of interests, right? But he's going and finding a connection here. And he's developing and nurturing that connection and putting it in his story, because it's important that he makes a connection between the different things in his life and the job he's looking for. So finally, really quickly, he uses a framework. So somebody in the chat said that this was an organized story. And that's because it starts with the past, it goes to the present, and then it ends with the future. Okay. So this is the framework that I'm going to be teaching you today. So let's recap really quickly what we're learning so far. We know that to tell a confident story, that's really what you want to be working towards, using this sort of past, present, future framework. We want you to remember to show off your skills and your accomplishments and your motivation, and bring that into the story. It's important to confidently acknowledge career changes and disruptions in your career. And I'm going to talk today about how to know if you should talk about certain gaps in your career. It's important not to mention every single past work experience that you've ever done. That's because the jobs that you've held that aren't relevant to what you want to do now, they don't really necessarily need to be in your story. And we'll talk about that too. And then finally, it's important to describe how your interest in the field developed with intention. So a lot of times we stumble into our careers, okay? It doesn't feel intentional. We just sort of feel like it happened. And that's really normal. But when you're telling your story, you need to find the connection between your past experiences and then use that to tell a story, even if in the moment when you were doing it, your career felt random. Okay. So you want your story to sound and feel confident and intentional. And it's okay if in your day to day, it didn't always feel intentional. But when you're crafting your story, you want to make that connection and make that a part of your story. So let's now talk about the specific framework that I mentioned for crafting your story. So here's this framework. It involves first starting with your past, then going into your present, and then talking about your future. So, step one, we'll start by talking about your past experiences, then move into your any part-time or full-time work that you're doing now, any education that you're pursuing, even if it's yourself teaching yourself things. And then you're going to end by describing what you want for your future and tying that back into the company you're talking to. Okay. So I'm going to call back Anthony because I want to look at one other example together. And then I'm going to go through the template for each part of the story that I'm going to give you. So I want you to meet Stefan, aka Anthony, and he's going to tell his story in three parts. So let's start with the past.
I've been working in the event planning industry for the past 10 years. I absolutely love the thrill of organizing 10,000 person events, working with diverse clients, and managing budgets. By the end of my tenure in planning, I was managing a team of 30 people across 6 regions. As COVID began to slow down and eventually halt the event business, I decided to explore some of my other passions. I had always been intrigued by digital marketing and even had some experience with it while event planning. I often supported the marketing team that promoted the various events I led, so I had some awareness of various marketing strategies and tools in the industry. I recently decided to fully transition my career into the digital marketing space and enrolled in the Facebook Digital Marketing Certificate program at my university. In this program, I am creating marketing plans, social media strategies, and various pieces of content marketing and social media ads. I'm most interested in your company because I'm looking for a role where I can combine my digital marketing skills with my event planning experience. The role at this company will allow me to use my marketing skills to support small businesses in marketing their events to a larger audience, which is very exciting and motivating me given my background.
Thank you. So let's talk about, let's bring this back to you, okay? I want us to look at kind of the framework and the template for how you're going to start with writing your past. Okay, so that's where you start when you're doing this. Here's an example template that you're going to get after this session, but that is what you can use to craft that. So over the past 1, 5, 10 years, I've been working as a blank. In this role, I developed skills I built and accomplished XYZ. I got really interested and inspired by ABC. I learned, XYZ about myself. Maybe you taught yourself something and you realize that there was so much more that you wanted to learn about something, right? So these are a couple of example sentence starters that you can use to tell the story of your past. So let's really quickly put this into an example. Okay, so here's a new person, Julia. So Julia is using this template. After high school, I went right into working for my family business. I scaled the family's painting business from 1 to 5 cities over the past 2 years. I learned how to manage people and budgets. The business was doing really well, but I wanted to equip myself with new technical skills that could help me really learn even more about scaling businesses and making data-driven decisions for a company. So Julia is not talking about everything that she's ever done, right? She's picking and choosing. And if we really analyze what I want you to include in here and what I don't want you to include in here, I would say that in the past, you definitely want to reference your past jobs that you've held. You want to talk about what you accomplished, right? And even if you're not like, oh, I'm not really sure exactly what I accomplished, go back to your resume, take a look at that. Think if you can kind of make some estimations or some guesses as to the exact impact you had, because not a lot of people know if they were in the top 10% or whatever. You don't have to be so specific, but try to quantify a little bit what you accomplished. You also want to mention the skills that you've gained, right? What you learned. And you will want to address any gaps or time off in your career. And we're going to talk about that today. And finally, you want to talk about your career interests, right? As Amanda said in that quote, people that are excited to talk to me, I'm excited to find a job for them. So how can you get excited about sharing your career interests with somebody else? Couple of things not to include in your past. You don't need to do a play-by-play of every role that you've held. That is not necessary because it's really important to include only the roles that have related or directly led you to the career that you want to have today. And I'm going to show you an activity to figure that out. You don't need to include short-term work experience that didn't necessarily build your skills. So if you're working in a restaurant, for example, to make some money and support your family or yourself, if that is not related to your current goal in your career, then it's not necessarily required that you mention it. You also want to be careful in how you talk about specifics of why you were laid off or why you're out of work. So I'm going to give you some examples of how you can do this, but this is really about not getting too specific about the transitions in your career. So one of the things that I want to do right now is I want to go through an activity because this is the hardest part for people. Figuring out what to include in your past is the hardest part. So if you're struggling with this, let's go through this activity that you can do later after the session that will help you to clarify what to include here. So we're going to use an example with Janine, and she is struggling to describe her past experiences. Okay, so her first step is she is going to write down every single job that she's ever held since high school, including education and any time off that she's had. So she does this and she writes down, well, her first job was as a bartender. Then she enrolled in college and she took some courses in project management. Then she decided that she didn't want to finish college and wanted to kind of go right into the workforce. So she became a receptionist. She got laid off from that position and she ended up starting contract work in medical billing for an insurance company. She hasn't really been that happy there in that role. So she started searching for a new career and she happened upon project management and a project management certificate that she's now enrolled in. So this is all the things that Janine has done since high school. So now what she's going to do is she's going to underline the experiences that gave her skills that directly relate to what she wants to do in her career. So let me say that again. She's going to underline experiences that directly relate to what she wants to do now in her career, which is go into project management. So she underlined that she took courses in project management. She underlined becoming a receptionist because that actually used some project management skills. And she underlined contract work and medical billing, even though she doesn't love it, but it helped her to also build project management skills and like teamwork skills. So she's got all these things underlined. And now it's time for her to take each of the things that she underlined and start to reframe them and talk about them in terms of of her story. So let me show you how that looks. So the first one that she underlined was that she did college courses in project management, right? So it doesn't matter that she didn't graduate. This was her first exposure to project management. And she remembers that she really loved it and it was orderly and it like made sense to her. So she remembers that part. When she was a receptionist, she was not a project manager as a receptionist, but she practiced project management and other skills like communication and teamwork. And then finally in medical billing, also not a project management job, she hated it, But she used project management skills here with all of the claims that she was working on. And she had to use a lot of attention to detail, which she knows is a skill that project managers use. So she underlined the experiences from her past that she feels have led her to where she is today. And then she's talking about each one and pulling out what she learned and accomplished from each one. So now it's time for her to put this into her template, okay? So here's what she came up with. I was first introduced to project management in college, where I took a few courses and absolutely loved it. My first job was as a receptionist at a law firm where I put my project management skills into practice. I implemented a new scheduling system for the office. I organized all of the company events, and I interacted with over 20 clients a day. I then transitioned into a role in healthcare, where I used project management to ensure that all of our claims were correctly billed for a top five insurance company. I was at one point managing and organizing 100 claims a day. While my past experience has been really diverse, I've had this opportunity to use project management across a variety of industries. So, this is a great example. She doesn't have any direct experience in project management, but it doesn't matter because she's telling a story here. She also doesn't mention that she had short term work as a bartender or that she was laid off, right? Instead, she's telling an intentional, confident story of herself. And even if when Janine was in these jobs, she didn't feel intentional. Maybe she even felt like totally out of control and random, right? But that's okay because we have the privilege of getting to look back on our experiences and putting it in whatever light we want. Okay. That's our right. That's what we get to do. Nobody can tell us how our story fits together. That's on us. So, we don't get to lie about what happened to us, but we get to tell our story however we want. And this is an example of Janine doing just that. So, I want to spend a minute and I want to talk to you about something important here, which is about gaps in your resume or in your work experience, because this comes up a lot. Questions of like, should I include it? Should I not? How do I talk about it? So, let's go here. In general, we all have something in our past that we wish was different about our career. Maybe we were unemployed. Maybe we got fired or laid off. Maybe we changed jobs a lot because we didn't like what we were doing. Okay. For me personally, I was very worried a couple of years ago because I was only at a job for 1 year at a time. And there was like two or three jobs that I had been at for a very short period of time. And I did worry about that for a little bit because it wasn't something that I loved about my resume, but I learned and I figured out a way of talking about it. There's another type of thing that can happen, which is that you might have had to do something in your life that was really courageous, right? And made you who you are today, but it may have taken you out of the job market. Okay. So those things are maybe there was something medical or mental health related that you needed to focus on. Maybe you were taking care of a sick family member. Maybe you were doing the most wonderful thing of raising and caring for children. Maybe you were traveling the world, right? These are things that make us who we are today, but they have an impact or they can have an impact on our resume. So, how do you know really if you should include these things in your story or not? Well, unfortunately, there's no one right answer. Okay. I would have to kind of sit down and talk with each of you and say, like, okay, yes or no. But I can give you a few questions to ask yourself to help you know if you should include it or not. So, the first question I want you to ask yourself is this something I even feel comfortable sharing with other people? Some people that I've worked with have had really intense things happen that have kept them out of the job market, and they haven't always felt comfortable telling other people that. So if you've had personal issues or health issues that have kept you from working, then you don't have to divulge all of that information. All you need to say is, you might notice a gap in my story, and that's because I was dealing with some personal issues or I was dealing with some health issues that made it unable for me to work. That's all you have to say. You don't owe anybody else more information than that. The second question to ask yourself is, did I learn something from this experience that might be relevant to my job or my next job, right? Because you might have taken time off to raise your children, okay? That is something that is a very meaningful experience that you should talk about it confidently. So for example, you might say, you might notice, I took some time off to take care of my children and raise them. And when I was doing that really fulfilling work, I realized that I actually wanted to make a career change. I actually wanted to kind of give up my former career in finance. And when I go back into the job market, I realized I wanted to really focus on event planning. So you can bring these things into your story and don't shy away from talking about them confidently. People will take more notice of them if you act embarrassed of them. The last question I want to ask is, if you don't include this information, right? If you don't include the gap, will there be big questions from the interviewer, right? So in general, I say that if you have more than a year of a gap on your resume, then you may want to say something in an interview to call it out and explain what happened, right? So you can say, I was laid off and I was exploring other options. I was doing some part-time work to try to figure out what I wanted to do next with my career. That's a totally acceptable thing to say. It's more about the tone and how you say it than necessarily what you're saying. So I'm sure that there's some questions in this area, and I encourage you to put them in the chat because I promise you we will get to them, because I bet you that they're important and good questions. So where are we here? We talked a little bit about the past, and I gave you a template, and I promise you will get that template after the session. We are going to now talk about the second part of your story, which is your present. And then we'll talk about how you talk about your future. So all of this is part of your story. We just did the first part. Now, how do you start talking about your present? So here's a template. I just completed or am enrolled in the certificate program called blank, and it taught me skills such as SQL, Facebook Ads Manager, Google Analytics, whatever the skills. In this program, I am working on projects like building my own ads campaign or doing exploratory data analysis on real data sets. I'm also still working part-time as a freelancer helping small businesses. Okay? That's all you've got to say about your current state. So let's take a look at this with Julie again. So I recently enrolled in the Tableau Data Analysis Certificate Program, which taught me analysis tools such as spreadsheets, SQL, and Tableau. In this program, I'm conducting an exploratory data analysis on various data sets and visualizing insights. On the side, I'm also still working with my family business to apply what I'm learning in data analysis. So what do we include here and what do we not include here? Let's talk about that. You want to include the education that you're enrolled in. Even if you're self-teaching yourself something, include that. People love to hear that. If you're teaching yourself Python on the side or you're exploring something on the side, put that in there, okay? That's great. You're self-teaching yourself something. If you're unemployed, then all you need to say is, I'm looking for work and have been doing some projects on the side to stay busy and teaching myself XYZ. Make sure to tell that story confidently. You also want to include specifics of what you're doing. And I said this before, a lot of people have a tendency to downplay their education. I don't know why, but people say, well, it's not job experience, it's just education. But today, a lot of education is project-based and tools and experiential. And so I want you to bring that in to talking about your present. And finally, you want to talk about any current jobs or freelance that you're doing or full-time jobs. One thing that you don't want to include here are jobs that are not relevant to your ultimate goal. Okay, so as I mentioned, if you're working retail or you're working part-time or you're working as an au pair or you're doing any number of things and they're totally unrelated to your goal, then I wouldn't necessarily include them. I don't think it's going to help you or serve you, and it's going to be complicated. So now that you've talked about your present, you're going to move quickly from the present into the future. And this is where you bring in the person that you're talking to, okay? So here's the template that I would suggest you use when you start talking about your future. Okay, so now I'm looking for a career where I can combine my interest in blank with my skills in blank. I want to bring this skill set to your company because I'm inspired by your commitment to whatever their mission or vision is. Okay. And that's, you'll look that up, right? But what can you pull out that you're inspired by about what they do? I guarantee you, you can find something. You can, another way to say this is, I am inspired and passionate about blank because of this reason, XYZ. Your company is aligned with my passion, right? And it allows me to use my skills in a way that's aligned with my purpose. So, what I had to do when I was looking for jobs a couple of years ago is I researched the heck out of all the companies I was talking to, and I tried to find something about that company that I was interested in. Maybe it was their mission. Maybe it was their company values. Maybe it was all of the volunteering experiences and all of the free promotional stuff they did for other people in the community, right? Whatever it is, I need you to connect that to your story and connect that to something other than just, I want a job and your company has an open job, right? There's nothing unique or interesting about that. So let's talk about, well, let's actually look really quickly at Julie's answer to this. So she says, I am looking for a career where I can combine my experience in scaling early stage companies, like I did with my family business, with skills in data analysis. The role at your company is an ideal environment for me to apply my entrepreneurial spirit to solving complex data challenges in a fast-paced startup environment. So she's taking her family's painting business, right? That was her, she didn't go to college. She went right into that after college. And she's making a connection between her family business and what she learned there, her data skills, and this company, which is also a startup, right? And is also a fast paced environment. And she gets to use her skills in this environment, right? So this is the part that takes some creativity and some thinking through. So what do you want to include here and what do you not want to include here? Obviously, the connection between your skills, your interests, and the company, the passion that you have, right? And the interest that you have. And sometimes you've got to dig deep for that passion and that interest, but you can always find it, I promise you. And you don't want to include vague or impersonal information about the company. Okay. So I noticed that you're located in the Atlanta area and I'm looking for a job in Atlanta. That's not going to take you very far. Okay. You need to do the extra research in the person that you're talking to and the company you're talking to. So here is it all together. I am not going to read this all over again to you, but here is Julie's story. She starts with her past, what she was doing, only including a couple of key things in here, and what she learned. She's talking about her present, and she's showing this education that she's getting. She's talking about how she's a hustler, right? She's working hard. And then in her future, she's making a connection between all these things. So when I read this to you, I sound really robotic because I'm reading off of a piece of paper for a story that's not my story, okay? But it's incredibly important that you actually write down your story first before you practice saying it. So that's kind of going into this last part here, which is, now that you know how, like a template for crafting your story, how do you deliver it? Because the delivery is just as important as what you say. So first things first is that you want to practice your story. You need to write it down, read it out loud, and record yourself. Maybe give it to others, your friends, right? And make sure it's taking you like 1 to 2 minutes. If it's taking you 5 minutes, it's too long. If you're just trying to get it out really quick because you don't want too much attention on you, then you need to approach it differently. You want to practice this story. You also want to write down your story. So I kid you not, when I go into phone screens or I go into any form of an interview, I have a piece of paper and I have on that piece of paper my story. Now, all of our phone interviews and all of our interviews have been remote lately, and most phone screens are remote because you don't go in right away. So it gives you a perfect opportunity to literally have a piece of paper that you can reference that gives you some information that has all of this written down so you don't lose track of what you're doing. So I literally recommend you write this down and you almost read it when you get to that part in an organic way. Remember to tailor your story. Just like you prepare for interviews, you need to prepare your answer to this question. And finally, I'm going to give you this annoying advice to be confident. And I'm not going to stand up here and tell you like, oh, you have to just be confident, because confidence is really difficult. So I'm really aware of that. So I can't tell you to be confident, but I want you to know that we all have unique stories. Okay. We all have things that we wish we love about our careers and things we don't love as much about our careers. No one story is better than another person's story. Okay. So just remember that if you don't speak confidently about your story, no one is going to feel confident when they hear it. So, when you tell your story, remember that it deserves to be told confidently. And the only person that can do that is you. So, you might not feel confident all the time in your career. Okay. There's imposter syndrome. I don't always feel confident, everybody. But when you're telling your story, you need to bring it. And you need to put aside those feelings, and you need to remember that your story deserves to be told with justice and with confidence and all of that. So really quickly, a recap on what we covered before we go into the Q&A. When you want to successfully answer this question, you need to prepare. And you need to write out a story that you feel proud of that starts with your past, your present, and your future. When you look at your past experiences, you want to pull out the ones that are related to where you want to go in your career. Now, that doesn't mean that if you want to be a data analyst, you have to pull out all of the data analyst experiences you had. Maybe you have an experience where somebody introduced you to data. Great, include that. Maybe you have an experience where you learned how to present information to other people. That's part of being a data analyst. Include that. So you want to find those transferable skills and you want to use them to describe your past. When you're describing your present, I want you to boast a little bit, right, about what you're currently doing and what you're currently accomplishing, right? I'm learning this. I taught myself this. I'm working as a freelancer in this. Like, be confident about what you're currently doing. And then in the future, make the case for why you want to talk to that company, why you want to work at that company. And as I said before, be proud, be confident, be proud of your story, your past, your present, and your future, because you're the one that gets to tell it. And you can choose to include certain things and not other things. Okay. That's your right. So, and as I said, if you aren't confident, who's going to be confident about your story if it's not you? So I am about ready for some Q&A. Really quickly, if you are interested in Pathstream programs, love for you to visit our website, pathstream.com/programs. This is an example of the kind of service that you get in our career services by joining our program. So this is an example of the content that you'll go through with your career coach. So here's where you can find out more about our programs. We have some cool Foundations of Data Science programming coming up at NYU and Emory, offered at both of those institutions if you're interested. And we have one final Designing Your Career workshop coming up next week with Anthony, where he's going to be doing a live podcast going through job search stories, the ups and downs of looking for jobs with some professionals that work at Pathstream. So with that, I would love to hear what questions you have. And I'll have Amanda, who's our former recruiter currently working at Pathstream, come on video, as well as Amy.
I will field some questions to both of you. One question that came in from Flavia is, what should you say about your past jobs if you are changing careers and the new career is not related?
That's totally okay. I love that. What is important that you do is you describe why you made this change, right? So a lot of times you might say, I was working for 10 years doing this, and then what is the spark? What is the moment that made you decide to change a career? Now, that might not be super clear to you, right? You might feel kind of random, but I want you to think of a way that you can turn it into a story. How can you explain how you went from being interested in one thing to being interested in something totally different? because people love a good story, right? So how did you do that? And explaining that in your story is critical. Don't try to hide it under a bunch of blankets, like bring it out into the open. Amanda, did you have anything to add there?
Yeah, and I'll just add on to that. That's a great question. And we answered a little bit in the chat, but it's interesting because we tend to think that our previous positions, if they are a different field, they aren't applicable. But the reality is that everything that you've done as far as your work experience, as far as your volunteering, internship, that's applicable if it's something, if you learn something from it. So if you only have this experience in this one field and you're transitioning to a position, and your last position maybe is in a completely different field, you can still use those skills that you learned. Let's say it's teamwork, let's say it's multitasking. There's general transferable skills that are applicable because you, like Lauren said, it's all part of your story. You learn that in your past position, and there are skills that you can take from each experience, no matter how different, that are applicable.
That's great. Very helpful answers. And then Juan had a good question that he's been on average in his last few jobs for 2 years. And now he's only been in this recent job for 1 year, but he's really feeling like it's not a great fit. So will he be perceived as if he's, job hopping if he tries to seek out a new role next? Or how could he craft his story in a way that shows that he is a committed employee? He just is looking for something new.
Yes. Hi, Juan. I know we chatted last week. I'm glad you're here. I would say that for me, I had this problem on my resume where I had those couple jobs that I was only at for a year. And I actually got asked in an interview, like, oh, so I've seen this on your resume. Like, what are you, what's going on? And I remember answering that question and saying, look, I've been in education for the past 13 years. And I love, education is my calling in life. But I've been at some companies where I haven't always felt connected to the mission of the company. And so I've only figured that out after being there a little while. And for me, it's really important to be connected to the mission of a company. So I decided to kind of move on to find a role in a position that was more aligned with my purpose. That's one way to say it. You also, another way to say it is just to be honest and say, I've really enjoying this role, but I'm looking for more challenge in my next role. And I'm not finding that in my current job. So I want a role that's going to give me more leadership and more challenge. And so I'm seeking a new position.
And to add on to that, and what Lauren touched is really important, I think, is highlighting something positive from, even if it was only a year, maybe it wasn't the best job you've ever had and you tried it and you didn't love it. The most important thing is that you're highlighting something positive from your experience. Let's say you're in a position that you didn't love, but you could still say, I learned that I can challenge myself and take on these tasks all at once, or you gain these skills and I, moved up in my job, and then I realized I want to try something new, and I'm excited to use those skills for this different position now. I learned a lot, but it's time for me to move forward. Whether or not it be a year or 2 years, that's okay to try something and decide that you want to do something different. I would just always highlight, if it wasn't a great experience, I would just always highlight something positive and why you're moving forward.
Love that. Always emphasize the positive, show you have a growth mindset, show that you've had a good relationship with your employers, even if you are moving on. Super smart. Christine has another good question. She has been working in her current profession for over 17 years, so a long time. And now she wants to change to a completely different field. So how should she articulate why she wants to work here when she's seeking out a new job in a totally new field at a new employer?
Yeah. It's a really good question. And the first thing that came to mind when you were asking that question, Amy, was the quote that Amanda, you had said about how important it is to be excited, right? And it doesn't matter if you've been working in the same job for 100 years and you decide you want to switch jobs. If you can explain your excitement for a new field and a new job, people flock to that excitement. People they perk up. When I talk to passionate people on the phone, I'm like, whoa, you're drawn to it, right? And so my question for you is, can you sit with yourself for a minute and think about why you're drawn to something new? It might be because your old career totally like it doesn't exist anymore, right? It could be that COVID destroyed it. I don't know what caused it, right? But regardless of the reality of what happened, look, what story can you tell about your passion and your interest? And that's the story you get to tell. Okay. You don't always have to be like, well, it disappeared in COVID and it wasn't anything for me to do. So I kind of flipped a coin and I picked this one, right? Like that might be what happened, but that's not what you have to say. You can say, one day I was watching YouTube videos and I stumbled upon Salesforce and I started looking into it and was like, wow, this is the most incredible profession and it's growing by 10,000 jobs a year, right? Like you can narrate that and say what you're looking for, and you should never be embarrassed of it, because people can sense the embarrassment in your voice, and that they might back away or they might try to lean into that and understand that. Instead, remember, it's your privilege and your right to tell the story the way you want it.
The other thing I would add there is, there's often other through lines that you can draw in your career path. So maybe you worked for 17 years as a nurse in a hospital, and now you want to become a Salesforce administrator, but you could find another healthcare organization that requires a Salesforce admin. Yeah. So you could actually say, I have 17 years of experience on the front lines as a healthcare professional. That's going to give me great empathy for dealing with all of this customer data in the context of a healthcare company. So even if it's not the exact same job title, you can think about what other connections you might have, whether that's the sector or the industry that you can be tying into your story too. Amanda, do you have any other things you want to share? I know you also answered her in the chat.
Yeah, I mean, you both covered it so well. I also was thinking too as well, and I know I answered in the chat as well. Your passion and interest for changing your careers will shine through. So if you're explaining, what led you, your 17 years of work, you learned something, you gained those skills, what led you now, and you're telling your story to where you are now. If you explain your excitement and you explain like what interests you, you might not have done this field before, but if you explain the feeling you get when you think about, the job duties that you could be doing and what you could be doing for this company, it's really important to put that into words and really show them, your interest. And to be honest, 17 years is a huge accomplishment as far as a career. And the fact that you're applying to somewhere else shows that you really must be interested in this field and you really must be interested in this position. So your employer will recognize that if you tell them why you're here and showing up for this interview.
That's great advice. Thanks, Amanda. Prasanna has a really relevant question. How should you present yourself if you're applying for an internal position? For example, moving from finance to a business info analyst.
Yeah, that's a good question. And you're going to want to work out the mechanics of who within your company you need to talk to, right? If that's HR or if that's your manager, and that's different everywhere. But once you've identified the person that you want to talk to, I think it's about showing, all that you've learned from your current role at the company. Like, I was learning this, I got experience in this, but my passion and my interest is really, I want to explore this other area, or I want to try taking on leadership in this other department. And I want to talk to you about, how I can make that reality happen for me. And so your story isn't going to be as long as it was, right, that I was showing you in those examples, because you're talking to somebody that might know you. Instead, you need to really talk about what you learned in your role and how that's led you to want this new role at the company, right? And so the story becomes a little bit shorter.
Super helpful. This is a really great question. And they say it's a strange question, but it's not. How would you practice authenticity generally in your communications as a human skill to not look artificial or scripted during job interviews when telling your story, which I think is super insightful as a question.
It's a really good question. Okay, I'll give one suggestion, then I want to hear from Amy and Amanda. But a lot of times when I'm nervous and I'm going into a conversation that feels really high stakes, I'm looking at the other person and I realize they're just like me. We're all at work, we're all doing our best, we're all wanting something better for ourselves and our families and our careers, and we're all the same. And so how can I talk to this other person like a friend, like a human being, right? That I can actually make smile, and I can get them to laugh at my jokes, or like get them to connect with me, right? And so break down that barrier, like they're a person too, and see if you can talk to them on that level. What do other people think?
Amanda, want to go for it?
Sure. My first thought, and this is a really interesting question. I feel like it will mean something a little different for everyone. But for me, my first thought was to practice authenticity and to show that you're a real human. I think it's just being honest. Obviously, we want to highlight the positive, and obviously, you want to tell your story in a light that shines that goodness that you've done, whether it be in previous positions or your personal growth and goals. But I think it's good to just be honest and really tap into those places that excites you, or taps into, what's most real and true for you. So if you learn this skill and you're really like proud of yourself, talk about that. If you're applying for a position and you're really excited about a certain aspect of it, talk about that. This person, is, like Lauren said, is a person just like you. And it might seem an intimidating situation, but the reality is they're looking at you to fill a role and fill a need. And the reality is that you're capable, and you've learned skills that will help them because of your unique background and experience. So it's about being honest and confident and tapping into those places where you're most excited, passionate, and proud of yourself. And you'll be able to hopefully connect with them.
Really quickly, also, thank you, Amanda. That was so insightful. Another thing that I struggled with when I first came here from New York is that I was like so stern. I'm like a true New Yorker, and I like wouldn't smile or anything. And I was just, being myself. But when I got here and I started like to California, and I started like smiling more, and when I go into a high stakes conversation, I just try to smile a little bit more than I normally would. And that actually helps me to feel like a little bit more light and a little bit more authentic with the other person, because usually they smile back, hopefully. But then at least you start the conversation on a light note.
That's great. And another really practical approach to this is to do mock interviews. So to have one of your family or friends just run through asking you questions, and you practice responding on the spot so that it comes out kind of natural. And the way I would get around having this feel too rehearsed or too scripted is to have them ask a variation of the like, tell me your story question. So it could be like, tell me what you've done in the last year that would be relevant to this job. Tell me how an experience from your childhood maybe prepared you for this role. So all slight variation so that you are naturally delivering these answers, but you get more comfortable kind of doing it on demand, doing it when someone asks you. And so you're not feeling too rehearsed when you go in. Okay. Akintayo recently joined. He just logged in and has a very specific question. So I will answer this quickly, but it's, what's the difference between a resume and a CV? And the short answer is that not much. In general, a CV is usually used more in academia. So it stands for a curriculum vitae, a Latin word. And that is going to be usually a longer form resume where you're going to list more academic publications. And in general, if you are doing Pathstream programs, you'll be working on developing a resume, because that's what the majority of employers are going to use. It's typically a 1 to 2 page document, so not quite as long. But if you see those terms, they're usually interchangeable, so you don't have to feel like they're too different. And just as a reminder, if anyone has final questions, please feel free to keep putting them in the Q&A. I do see Anuj just submitted a new one. How long should a resume be? 1 page or 2? Maybe Amanda, since you've done a lot of resume screening, I will turn it over to you.
That's a great question. So it has changed over the years. However, I would still say that when you're applying to an employer and a company, if you can keep it as brief as possible, this will ensure that employers can take a look, review your resume, and hit the most important points. So if you can keep it to one page, that's ideal. However, if you have extremely relevant experience that is applicable to this job, it's so important. You learned these certain skills and you feel like it really explains your story and your career experience, go ahead and make it 2 pages. I would say that, ideally, if you can keep it 1 page, that's just the best as far as like user experience for employers, and especially for staffing agencies if you're looking at that route, because they do look at hundreds of resumes. So the best way is to keep it to 1 page if you can. If you can keep it, if you can't do that and you do 2 pages, that's okay. I wouldn't go over 2 unless it's explicitly okay in your career path. Like if you're a teacher or something that's a little bit different and more specific, then oftentimes there'll be exceptions made, but 2 would be, the most, I would say.
And Anuj, we just looked at your resume this morning and it is in perfect shape, clocking in at about 1.5 pages. So I think you are right within the range. So I wouldn't worry too much. Let's see, a few more questions here for people. Rachel is asking, any good resources for mock interviews? And I can take that one to start. First of all, I would just say sometimes a family, friend, coworker, they can be really great if you just give them the job description that you're applying for and ask them to focus on the responsibilities section and kind of turn those into questions. So if the job description is saying, requires experience entering data, they can then ask you, when have you had an experience where you've had to enter data before? So use your network of family and friends to just run through things. But the other resources, I would say, one is called the Big Interview. So this is more of like a software or online course, which can actually run you through example scenarios in different fields. And then the other one that we use at Pathstream is called Talk Hired. And again, this can actually simulate for you a video interview, a phone screen, different kinds of interview formats, and then we'll give you automated feedback based on like, how many times did you say, how many, what's the average length of your answer time? So it can also give you some good input, but when you can, just use real people. I think that can be very helpful. Let's see. And I think Lauren answered the last question in the chat here. So I think we are good. Lauren, any other final thoughts?
No, I don't think so. I just so appreciate everybody's thoughts in the Q&A, in the chat. Like, it's so wonderful to actually, even though we're in webinar mode, like I actually feel like I'm connecting with people and understanding what their pain points are and what people's questions are. So thank you so much for showing up and being here. And we will send you a recording of this tomorrow, as well as some of this information in written form so that you can reference the template in a written format as well. So we will see you guys next week. Thank you so much for your questions and for your time, and have a wonderful weekend.